Martha had lived in the old stone house for nearly 40 years, yet one corner of it always felt like a locked memory. The house sat at the edge of a quiet town where most people waved and kept walking. It had tall windows, creaky floors, and a basement that smelled like earth after rain. Martha was 72, with silver hair she pinned back every morning, and hands that still knew how to fix small things. She lived alone now, because her husband Tom had passed away years earlier, and their children had moved far away for work. The house stayed full of sound anyway, because old homes talk in their own way. The pipes clicked at night, the wood shifted in winter, and the wind found tiny gaps to whisper through. Martha did not fear those sounds, because she had heard them for most of her life. What she feared was the silence around one family story that nobody finished. Her grandmother once mentioned a room that was sealed long ago, then stopped talking as if the words had burned her tongue. Martha remembered that moment clearly, because the adults changed the subject fast, and the fire in the stove suddenly felt too hot. When Martha asked questions later, she was told it was nonsense, just a tale to keep kids out of trouble. She believed it for years, until the day she found something that did not fit the normal shape of the basement wall. It happened on a calm autumn morning when she decided to clean out old boxes and donate what she did not need. She moved a tall wooden shelf that had always been in the same spot, and behind it she saw stonework that looked newer than the rest. The stones were smoother, set in a tighter pattern, and the dust on them was lighter, like it had been disturbed at some point. Martha leaned closer and traced the edge of the stones with her fingertips. She felt a faint line that looked like the outline of a door. Her stomach tightened, and her mouth went dry. She told herself it was nothing, maybe a repair from long ago, maybe a patch where water once leaked. Still, she could not stop thinking about it. For the rest of the day, her eyes kept drifting toward the basement stairs, and her mind kept replaying her grandmother's voice. That night, she slept badly, waking to the sound of wind against the windows, then sitting up in bed as if someone had called her name. In the morning, she tried to laugh at herself, but the curiosity stayed. She went about her routine, made tea, fed the birds on the porch, and folded laundry, yet she felt pulled toward the hidden wall like a magnet. On the 5th day, she made a quiet decision she did not speak out loud. She drove to the hardware store in town and bought a small hammer and a chisel. The young clerk smiled and asked if she was fixing a garden path. Martha smiled back and said she was fixing something old. She returned home with the tools in a paper bag, her heart thumping harder than it should for a simple errand. In the basement, she pushed the shelf aside again and cleared the floor, coughing as dust rose around her. She placed the chisel against the stone and tapped it carefully, listening to the sound. The first strike echoed through the basement like a warning. She paused and waited, but nothing else moved. She struck again, stronger this time, and a small crack formed along the line she had traced. Martha kept going slowly, one careful hit at a time, because she was not trying to break the house, only open the truth. After nearly an hour, a section of the stone came loose and fell away, revealing dark wood behind it. Martha stepped back and stared, her chest rising and falling as if she had climbed a hill. A door stood there, hidden inside the wall, its surface marked with old scratches and faint shapes that looked like symbols. A heavy iron lock held it shut, rusted but stubborn. The sight made her hands tremble, because it was real, and it meant the story was not a story. Martha lifted the hammer and hit the lock near its hinge. The metal rang, then held. She hit it again, and flakes of rust fell like brown snow. On the third hit, the lock snapped and dropped to the floor with a dull thud. Martha flinched at the sound, then reached for the door handle. The door resisted at first, then gave in with a slow creak that made her skin prickle. A cold breath of air pushed out into the basement, carrying the smell of dust and old paper. Martha covered her mouth and nose with her sleeve and leaned forward to look inside. The room was small, windowless, and darker than the basement itself. A table sat in the center with a lantern on top, oddly intact, like it had been placed there on purpose. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes, bundles of paper tied with string, and jars that held nothing but cloudy air. Martha stepped inside carefully, feeling the floorboards groan under her weight. She moved slowly, because she did not want to disturb anything more than she had to. She opened the nearest box and found documents inside, stacked neatly, not like forgotten junk, but like records someone wanted preserved. Some pages were typed in an old style, others were handwritten in sharp, careful lines. Many pages had stamps and seals she did not recognize. Martha read a few lines and felt her throat tighten. The names and places were not personal family notes, but official sounding lists, like reports and instructions. One paper mentioned shipments and routes, with dates that went back more than 100 years. Another held a map with marked circles and notes in the margins written in code like short letter and number pairs. Martha did not understand the full meaning, but she understood enough to know it was serious. She set the papers down and looked around the room again, noticing details she had missed in her first shock. In the corner stood a metal cabinet that looked newer than the shelves, like it belonged to a different time. Its lock was not the same old iron as the door lock, and that difference made her stomach drop. It meant someone had opened the sealed room at some point and added things later. Martha swallowed and walked to the cabinet, then tried the handle. It did not move. She used the hammer carefully, prying at the lock until it gave way with a sharp pop. Inside were photographs in black and white, stacked in folders, each folder labeled with a date and a short note. Martha pulled one out and saw a group of men standing beside wooden crates near a train platform. She pulled another and saw a building she did not recognize, with a number painted on the side. Then she pulled a photograph that made her sit down on the floor without meaning to. The picture showed the front of her own house, taken from the road, with the porch and the tall windows clearly visible. On the back, a date was written from nearly a century ago, along with a line of notes that included a location and a code. Martha stared at it until her eyes watered, not from sadness, but from the sudden pressure of fear and confusion. Her home was not just a home in these papers, and her family was not just a family in this story. She gathered a few photographs and several documents, choosing the ones that felt most important, and held them against her chest as if they could keep her steady. She backed out of the room and pulled the door shut, then stood in the basement and listened to the quiet around her. The house felt the same, but Martha did not feel the same. She walked upstairs, locked the basement door, and sat at the kitchen table under the warm light. She spread the papers out and read them again, slower this time, trying to make sense of what she could. The more she read, the more she realized the discovery was bigger than a family secret. It sounded like something hidden on purpose, something that might still matter now. Martha looked at the phone on the counter and hesitated, because calling for help would change everything. Then she remembered the newer cabinet lock, and the thought that someone might return for what was hidden. Her fingers shook as she picked up the phone, and after one deep breath, she began to dial the number for the nearest federal office, because this was not a problem for one elderly woman to solve alone. Martha held the phone for a long moment before pressing the final number, because she understood that once she spoke the truth out loud there would be no way to return to quiet days. The call connected and a calm voice answered, and Martha explained in steady words that she had found sealed materials in her home that seemed official and dangerous. She gave her name, her address, and described the documents and photographs without guessing their meaning. The voice on the other end listened carefully and asked her to stay where she was and keep the items safe. Martha agreed and placed the phone down gently, then sat still at the kitchen table while the house hummed around her. She did not feel fear as much as a deep sense of responsibility, because whatever her family had hidden now belonged to the present. An hour passed slowly, marked by the ticking clock and the soft sound of wind against the windows. When a car finally pulled into the driveway, Martha rose and looked through the curtain, seeing two people step out with calm movements and serious faces. She opened the door before they knocked, because waiting felt heavier than acting. They introduced themselves with simple words and showed official badges, then asked permission to enter and see what she had found. Martha led them to the kitchen table and laid the papers and photographs out again, watching their eyes sharpen as they scanned the dates and codes. One of them asked if anyone else knew about the room, and Martha said no, because she had lived alone for years and rarely had visitors. They thanked her and asked to see the basement, and Martha nodded, taking a deep breath as she led them downstairs. The hidden door looked darker now, as if it understood it was no longer secret. They entered the room carefully, taking notes and photographs of the shelves, the cabinet, and every detail of the space. Martha stood back, feeling like a guest in her own house, yet also the only person who truly knew its heartbeat. One of the agents paused at the metal cabinet and pointed out the newer lock, explaining quietly that it suggested recent access. Martha felt a chill, because it confirmed her fear that someone else might still be connected to the secret. The agents collected the most sensitive items into secure folders and explained that they would need to take them for further review. Martha agreed, because she had already crossed the line of discovery and understood the need for care. Before leaving, they asked her to stay elsewhere for a few nights if possible, just as a precaution. Martha said she could stay with her friend Ellen across town, a woman who knew her well enough not to ask too many questions. That evening, Martha packed a small bag and locked the house behind her, glancing once at the windows as if the house might speak. At Ellen's home, the warmth and light helped ease her mind, but sleep still came slowly. Martha dreamed of footsteps in the basement and voices she could not understand, then woke before dawn with her heart racing. The next day brought a visit from the same comm agents, who thanked her again and told her that the materials pointed to a long-hidden operation tied to transport routes and protected locations from a century ago. They did not share every detail, but they confirmed that the house had been used as a storage and transfer point long before Martha was born. Martha listened quietly, absorbing the weight of history settling on her shoulders. She asked if her family had done something wrong, and they replied that history was complicated and often shaped by fear and survival. That answer did not fully comfort her, but it helped her breathe easier. Over the next few days, the house became a quiet center of activity, with careful inspections that left no mess and no noise. Neighbors noticed official cars but were told only that routine checks were happening, and the town returned to its slow rhythm. Martha spent her time walking with Ellen, feeding birds in the park, and thinking about the stories that had shaped her childhood. She realized that her grandmother's silence had been an act of protection, not secrecy for its own sake. When the agents returned the following week, they told Martha that the most immediate concerns were resolved and that the room would be secured properly. They thanked her for her courage and honesty, words that made her feel both proud and tired. After they left, Martha returned to her home, stepping inside with a new awareness of its walls and floors. The house felt lighter, as if relieved to have shared its burden. Martha went to the basement one last time and stood before the sealed door, now reinforced and marked for protection. She placed her hand on the cool stone and whispered a quiet goodbye to the unknown past. Upstairs, she brewed tea and sat by the window, watching the day unfold with ordinary beauty. Martha understood that she had been chosen not by chance but by time, because secrets wait for the right moment and the right person. As the sun dipped low, she felt a calm settle over her, knowing that she had done what was needed and that the truth no longer rested alone in the dark. Martha thought the hardest part was over, but time proved her wrong when quiet days began to feel heavier than the loud ones. After the agent secured the hidden room, the house no longer whispered secrets, yet it felt different, like a friend who had shared a deep truth and now watched her closely. Martha returned to her routines, waking early, making tea, and opening the curtains to let in the pale morning light. Neighbors smiled and waved as usual, unaware that history had unfolded beneath their feet. Still, Martha noticed small changes in herself, because she listened more carefully to sounds and trusted her instincts more than before. Some nights she dreamed of the room again, not with fear, but with questions that had no clear answers. She wondered who had stood where she stood, who had carried those crates, and who had decided to seal the truth behind stone. One afternoon, a letter arrived with an official seal, requesting her presence for a conversation at a nearby office. Martha folded the letter neatly and placed it beside her teacup, feeling a mix of calm and resolve. She understood now that truth often asked more than one favor. The next morning, she dressed simply and drove herself into town, parking near a plain building that blended into its surroundings. Inside, she was greeted warmly and guided to a quiet room where two familiar faces waited. They thanked her again for coming and explained that her discovery had helped connect missing pieces of a long unfinished investigation. Martha listened as they described how old routes and records had puzzled historians and officials for decades. Her home had been a missing link, a silent witness that finally spoke. They showed her copies of cleaned photographs and translated notes, explaining them in simple terms so she could understand without feeling overwhelmed. Martha learned that the room had once protected items meant to stay hidden during uncertain times, not for harm, but for control and leverage. The idea unsettled her, because it showed how fear could shape choices across generations. She asked whether her family had been forced into this role, and the answer came gently, suggesting pressure and survival rather than greed. Martha nodded slowly, feeling compassion for people she had never met. Before she left, they asked if she would allow historians to document parts of the house for records, without revealing its location to the public. Martha agreed, believing that truth deserved care, not noise. Back home, she walked through each room with fresh eyes, touching doorframes and walls as if greeting them again. The house felt less mysterious now and more honest. Days passed, and visits became less frequent, until one evening when Martha received another call, this time with unexpected news. She was told that some items found in the room had been linked to families still searching for answers about lost relatives and forgotten paths. The words settled deeply in her heart. Martha realized the room had not only hidden secrets but had also delayed closure for many lives. She offered to help in any way she could, even if it meant sharing memories and stories passed down in fragments. Weeks later, she welcomed a small group of careful visitors who documented the house respectfully, asking questions that Martha answered as best she could. Each visit felt like releasing another breath the house had been holding. Between visits, Martha spent time with Ellen, sharing simple meals and laughter that grounded her. Ellen noticed a new strength in Martha, a steadiness shaped by facing the unknown and choosing honesty. One quiet evening, Martha sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in soft colors. She thought about how close she had come to ignoring the hidden wall forever. The thought made her grateful and uneasy at the same time. She understood that courage often arrived late in life, when fear had less power and purpose mattered more. As autumn deepened, Martha began writing letters to her children, not explaining every detail, but sharing lessons about listening, asking questions, and respecting the past. Writing brought her peace, because it turned experience into guidance. One night, while sorting old family photos, Martha found an image of her grandmother standing on the same porch, her eyes serious yet kind. Martha smiled softly, understanding at last the weight her grandmother had carried in silence. She whispered a thank you into the quiet room. Winter arrived gently, covering the town in white and slowing life even further. The house felt warm and safe, no longer burdened by secrets. Martha continued her days with calm purpose, knowing that what she uncovered had reached beyond her own life. She felt connected to history not as a story in books, but as a living thread she had touched. In moments of stillness, she accepted that some answers would remain incomplete, and that was enough. Martha had opened a door meant to stay closed, not out of curiosity alone, but out of trust in truth. And in doing so, she had given the past a voice and the present a chance to listen. Martha felt a quiet change settle into her life as winter slowly gave way to early spring and the town began to breathe again. The house stood firm against the cold winds, no longer hiding anything from her, and she moved through its rooms with steady confidence. She woke each morning with purpose, knowing her days still mattered even at her age. News came gradually from the officials who had taken the documents, and each update carried a sense of completion rather than fear. They told her that the findings had helped close several unanswered questions tied to old routes and lost records, and that her honesty had made a lasting difference. Martha listened carefully, not seeking praise, but understanding that truth had a long echo. The sealed room remained locked and protected, but it no longer felt heavy to her. It was simply part of the house now, like an old scar that had healed. Neighbors eventually asked gentle questions about the activity they had seen months earlier, and Martha answered with simple words, saying only that the house had a long history. She learned that not every truth needed full detail to be respected. One afternoon, her children visited from out of town, noticing something new in her posture and voice. She did not tell them everything, but she shared enough to teach them about courage and responsibility. They listened closely, seeing their mother not just as someone who raised them, but as a person who had faced something unexpected and chosen wisely. As days passed, letters arrived from historians and researchers thanking her for her cooperation and care. Martha read each one slowly, then placed them in a small wooden box she kept near her bed. She did not keep them as trophies, but as reminders that even quiet lives could shape larger stories. Ellen often joined her for tea in the afternoons, and they talked about simple things like gardens and memories, yet Martha felt that those conversations carried deeper meaning now. She had learned that listening was as important as speaking. One evening, Martha walked through the basement again, standing near the reinforced wall where the door had once been hidden. She placed her palm against the cool stone and felt no fear at all. Instead, she felt gratitude for the chance to be trusted by time. The house seemed to rest easily around her, no longer holding its breath. Spring brought soft rain and new green leaves, and Martha spent more time outside, tending to flowers she had neglected in earlier years. Each planted seed felt like a promise that life continued forward. She reflected on how close she had come to ignoring the hidden sign behind the shelf, and how different everything might have been if she had chosen comfort over curiosity. That thought strengthened her resolve to remain open to questions, even uncomfortable ones. One morning, a final call came confirming that all active concerns were resolved and that her role in the matter was complete. The voice thanked her once more, and this time Martha smiled as she said goodbye. She hung up the phone and felt a sense of peaceful closure settle over her. There were no more mysteries waiting for her to solve in that house, and she was content with that. Martha spent her evenings reading by the window, watching the town lights flicker on one by one. She felt connected to the people around her in a new way, as if shared ground held shared responsibility. In moments of quiet reflection, she understood that age had not weakened her, but refined her judgment. She had acted not out of fear or pride, but out of care for truth and safety. When summer arrived, Martha hosted a small gathering in her garden, inviting neighbors and friends to share food and laughter. No one spoke of sealed rooms or old secrets, yet the warmth between them felt earned. Martha looked around at the familiar faces and felt deeply rooted. As the evening ended and the guests departed, she remained outside for a moment longer, listening to the soft sounds of the night. She thought of her grandmother again, imagining the relief she might feel knowing the burden was finally lifted. Martha whispered a quiet promise to honor the past by living honestly in the present. Inside, the house stood calm and silent, its story complete. Martha closed the door, turned off the lights, and went to rest with a steady heart. She knew that while some stories begin with shock, the best endings arrive with peace.